The land stretched endlessly, rolling plains bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, the sky streaked with purples and reds that seemed to bleed into the horizon. The air was still, heavy with the kind of silence only the frontier could hold, broken only by the faint chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through tall grass. Perched on a ridge was a small wooden cabin, its roof weathered but sturdy, smoke spiraling from the crooked chimney as though the house itself breathed life into the lonely prairie. Inside, Clara sat by the table, her hands busy stitching the tear in a worn saddlebag, the soft flame of the oil lamp casting a warm glow over her face. She looked no different from any other ranch girl, slender, sunburned cheeks, hair tied back with a scrap of ribbon, but there was a quiet strength in her posture, a sense that she belonged to the wild land as much as the grass and the wind did. To an outsider, though, she looked vulnerable, a young woman living far from town, no one around to hear if trouble came pounding at her door. Not far from the cabin, trouble had already found her. 3 men crouched low in the mesquite, their dark outlines almost swallowed by the brush as they studied the place with hungry eyes. Boone, their leader, shifted the cigar stub from one side of his mouth to the other, grinning with crooked teeth as he nudged his companions. The scar across his cheek caught the dying light, a reminder of the violence that clung to him like a second skin. His men were no better, one with the bandana around his neck stained from old blood, the other twitchy and eager, his hand never straying far from the grip of his pistol. They whispered in low tones about the cabin, about the girl they had glimpsed through the window, about how easy this job would be. To them, the house was a chest waiting to be cracked open, its contents theirs for the taking. But as they laughed quietly at their own plans, the prairie seemed to shift. A faint growl rumbled against the air, carried from somewhere beyond the barn, too low for them to catch but enough to stir the horses tied nearby. A shadow moved just out of sight, something large, something watching. Boone spat into the dirt and waved his men forward, certain this was just another lonely ranch ripe for the picking, unaware that the silence of the prairie was not emptiness at all, but warning. The crash of the cabin door echoed like a thunderclap across the quiet prairie, wood splintering under Boone's heavy boot as the hinges groaned and gave way. Clara jolted upright, the needle slipping from her fingers and clattering against the table, but she did not scream or stumble back like the intruders expected. Her brown eyes, sharp and steady, flicked toward the shadowed corner of the room where the lamplight did not reach, and her breathing slowed as though she had been waiting for this moment. Boone swaggered inside first, a pistol loose in his hand, his confidence filling the small cabin like smoke. The other 2 spread wide, circling her with smirks on their faces, their boots thudding against the wooden floorboards as if they already owned the place. "Even in, Missy," Boone drawled, his voice dripping with menace as his eyes roved over the shelves and the neat rows of jars lined against the wall. "Now don't you fuss. You just hand over what's worth talking, and maybe we'll leave your little shack standing." His words hung in the air, heavy and taunting, but Clara's lips pressed into a firm line, refusing to give him the satisfaction of fear. One of the men, the twitchy one with the restless hands, kicked over a chair near her feet, the crack of wood startling in the confined space. He laughed harshly, expecting her to flinch, to cower, but Clara stood as still as a fence post, her shoulders squared, her gaze unwavering. Then it came, low and guttural, rising from the shadows like the earth itself growling. The sound rolled through the cabin, vibrating in the walls and the men's bones, so unexpected that the laughter died instantly. Boone's head jerked toward the darkened corner, his pistol rising, his face tightening as his bravado wavered. 2 glowing orbs, pale and unblinking, burned in the blackness near the hearth, fixed on them with an intensity that froze the blood in their veins. The men cursed under their breath, taking half a step back, their confidence shaken by something they couldn't yet see. Clara's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, the faintest curl at the edge of her lips betraying the knowledge she carried. She said nothing, but her silence was louder than any threat, and the bandits felt, for the first time since they had kicked in her door, that maybe they had walked onto more than they bargained for. From the darkness, the creatures stepped forward, and the bandits' breath caught in their throats. A massive wolf emerged into the lamplight, its fur mottled gray and silver, bristling with menace as its paws padded silently across the wooden floor. Its yellow eyes glowed with an unnatural sharpness, locked onto Boone and his men as though measuring which throat to tear out first. The air seemed to thicken with the sound of its growl, low and steady, like the rolling of distant thunder. One of the outlaws swore loudly and stumbled back, his hand jerking clumsily toward the pistol at his hip. Boone, teeth clenched, raised his revolver and squeezed the trigger, the deafening shot exploding through the cabin. The bullet tore into the wall behind the wolf, scattering wood splinters, but the beast didn't flinch. It lowered its body, muscles rippling under its fur, ready to strike. Clara lifted her hand, calm and deliberate, and the wolf froze mid-step, its growl subsiding into silence though its size never left the intruders. Boone blinked, confusion flashing across his face as the girl they thought helpless suddenly commanded the kind of authority that even beasts obeyed. Her voice cut through the tense air, cool and steady. "I told you, this house isn't unguarded." The certainty in her tone unsettled the men more than the wolf's teeth ever could, for it carried no tremor, no hint of bluff. Before they could recover, the door creaked again and another figure appeared, framed by the glow of the fading sun outside. A tall man stepped in, his presence as commanding as the wolf's but carried with silent control. His skin was bronze, his hair dark and braided, a bow slung across his back with the quiver of arrows resting against his shoulder. His gaze, sharp and unreadable, passed over the bandits like a hawk surveying prey. Clara's eyes softened for the first time, not with weakness but with recognition, as if she had known all along he would come. The bandits' bravado drained away as quickly as the whiskey courage that had brought them this far. They exchanged uneasy glances, caught between the snarling wolf, the unflinching girl, and the silent warrior whose calm felt more dangerous than any threat. Boone shifted his weight, his arrogance faltering as the walls of the small cabin seemed to close in, transforming from the easy target they imagined into a fortress guarded by strength they had never reckoned with. Boone's lip curled in defiance, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear he couldn't quite hide. "A wolf and some painted savage don't scare me," he spat, gripping his revolver tighter as though the words themselves could restore the confidence draining from his men. The warrior didn't flinch at the insult, his gaze steady and unwavering, his hand resting lightly on the bow as though he had all the time in the world. Then, in a motion so swift it seemed impossible, he drew an arrow, notched it, and released. The string thrummed, the arrow slicing through the thick cabin air and striking Boone's pistol with a crack. The weapon flew from his hand, spinning uselessly into the beam above, where it quivered like a warning. Boone cursed and grabbed his wrist, the shock leaving him momentarily frozen. The wolf moved next, a blur of fur and teeth, lunging so close to the second bandit that the outlaw toppled backward over the broken chair, his hat flying off as he scrambled to shield himself. The beast's jaws snapped with terrifying force, the sound alone enough to freeze the blood in his veins. The twitchy outlaw tried to raise his pistol, but Clara's sharp voice cut through the chaos, steady and commanding. "Don't." The word was simple, quiet, but it carried such finality that his hands trembled, the gun slipping from his grip to clatter against the floor. Panic swept through the men, their earlier hunger for easy loot now twisted into sheer desperation to escape. Boone, red-faced and humiliated, scrambled toward the doorway, shoving past his companions as he barked orders that no one listened to. The man who had fallen tore himself free of the overturned chair and bolted after him, while the last outlaw hesitated for half a breath, eyes darting between Clara, the warrior, and the wolf, before he too fled into the night. Their boots pounded across the porch and into the dry grass beyond, fading quickly into the vast emptiness of the prairie. Inside the cabin, silence reclaimed the air, broken only by the wolf's heavy breathing and the creak of the bow as the warrior eased the string back to rest. Clara stood in the center of the room, her hands steady at her sides, her eyes following the direction the man had gone. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing long shadows across the walls, shadows that no longer seemed threatening but protective, as if the cabin itself had revealed its true nature at last.